Hello and welcome to this episode of Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where I have conversations with entrepreneurs doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on those with some connection to Latin America. This episode is brought to you by LatamList.com, a daily English language news source that covers Latin American tech news. If you like this podcast, you'll like Latam List. My guest today is Federico Casas, a Mexican entrepreneur and angel investor who has been involved in the ecosystem from almost the beginning. He's co-founded multiple businesses, some that produce cash flows today, others that have exited, and others that have crashed and burned. He's also been an angel investor, co-founded a company builder, and was part of one of the early venture capital firms in Mexico. Today, he's part of an angel network / VC fund called Zero BS that invests in early stage companies along with other successful entrepreneurs in Mexico. We cover his journey through startups, successes and failures, how he sees the Mexican ecosystem, advice for founders looking to raise money, how we can help empower people who haven't traditionally been successful in Mexico, and his recommendations on how to find ideas to work on. I really hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Hey, Federico, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being willing to do it.
Hey, Nathan. Thank you for the invitation.
No, I'm glad we could do it. So where are you in the world today?
Right now I'm in Mexico City.
Awesome. And what are you doing in Mexico City?
Well, here I'm right now kind of working my way between being an investor, an angel investor, and not stopping being an entrepreneur. So kind of in the middle of those two.
And what took you to this spot? What kind of companies did you work on in the past?
Well, I've been all over the place. I started with ecotourism, then I dipped a little in mobility. I also funded a company builder. I got into venture capital, and through all those learnings, that's why I'm here.
Awesome. So you've been on all the different levels of the startup ecosystem in Mexico. So this is going to be fun. We'll be able to share a lot of your story with people. I think it'll be really informative. So I'm glad we can do it. So before we jump into the business piece of it, I want to talk a little bit about your background. So where are you from originally?
I'm originally here from Mexico City.
Awesome. And did you always know that you were going to be entrepreneurial and get into starting your own businesses, or was it something that came up later on in your life?
No, I think I'm one of those that always knew. I think entrepreneurs can be either born or made, and I think I was born one.
And do you have some examples of when you were younger of things that you might have been doing that were entrepreneurial, or
Yeah,
things that you did that people thought were maybe strange for a young person to be doing?
yeah, I have a very specific one. The school that I attended to, I remember going out one day out of school, and I saw this guy in Mexico, like a street vendor, that would sell this kind of keychains or something like that you would make yourself. They were made out of plastic, and you made them. And he was, from my point of view, maybe I was, I don't know, probably 8 years old. He was making a fortune. So I went to my dad and I told him, "Hey, this guy's making a fortune and he's selling them outside of the school. I could make them and sell them inside the school." And I remember my dad, he's not an entrepreneur, but he told me the basics, like, hey, well, you need to buy stuff, then you need to put it together. So basically adding value, and then you sell it. So we found out where this guy or these guys bought the raw materials. We went there, bought them, and I started selling those things, those keychains inside of the school. And I was 8 years old. So I don't know if it was that successful, but I got the hang of it. And since then, I think it's stuck in my mind. And that's the only way I knew how to make money or make a living or just have fun.
And do you remember any of the reactions of your friends or friends' parents when you were an 8-year-old budding entrepreneur?
Yeah, it was. I think the reaction, the main reaction was something between this guy's weird and he's super smart. So something like that.
That's awesome. And then as you're going through school and deciding to what to do after high school, what kind of other projects were you working on, and what made you decide to do what you did next?
Well, actually, I was working on two projects. I remember. One, I would. It was when MP3 just came out, and Napster and, well, all those softwares. So I got a hang of it really early in my life. So I had a huge MP3 collection, and so I started hiring. I remember I played music on my sister's, like a small party, birthday party, whatever. And I said I could charge for this. So then I started charging, but then I saw that I didn't like being that kind of DJ, if you can call it. So I started hiring people, like my friends, and they would take my computer, plug it into speakers, play MP3s, and we had the most recent collection of music. And then I bought another computer and another computer. So I had like this group of maybe 5 friends that they would go to parties and just play music. And so it was like kind of my first venture, like making money. And but then at the same time, I was working at a summer camp as a counselor, and I really, really, really liked being in nature. So when I was in college and university, my first business was right around that. So ecotourism.
And what did you study in university?
I'm an industrial engineer.
And so when you were in what year of university did you start doing the ecotourism business?
My So it was probably my second year.
And what did your friends have to say when you were starting a business already in your second year of school? I mean, I also started my first business my second year of school, and I remember my friends just being like, "What is this guy doing? I don't get it. Like, what we should be studying. You're doing something weird, working extra time." What was your friend's reaction?
Well, basically that. I mean, of course, they thought I was weird. Also, I would, since it was an ecotourism company, most of my business was during weekends. So I missed all of the social entertainment, partying in college. So that made me even weirder. Um, so, so it was kind of like that. And also because, I mean, we were engineers and the company was ecotourism, and it was children ecotourism. So we were like, bullied in a good way, not bullied, but people would make fun of us, my business partner and myself, and they would call us Boy Scouts and whatnot.
And how much longer after you graduated did you continue to run that business?
um, 1 year after I graduated, and I sold it.
And so you had your first sale of a business right after school. That was actually like fairly
Yeah.
similar to mine as well, right at the end of school. And so, what just made you decide to sell the business rather than keeping doing it?
Yeah. I remember being burned out. I was 1 year out of college and I was burned out. And that's been the only time in my life that I've been like that. I was a workaholic. I would work insane hours. And of course, the business was doing well, but my health was like that of a 50-year-old. And I was in my 20s. So I had I had the realization that I needed to improve my life physically, with my friends, socially, everything. So that's why I decided to sell the company, and it ended up being a really, really, really good time to sell it. After that, there was a financial crisis in 2008, I think, or something like that. But there was I think 2 years after that was a crisis. I can't remember, but so I sold it almost at the peak. So right now the company still operates, and it's better than it was. I mean, it eventually grew more than when I sold it, but for a few years I sold it at a peak. So it was a good decision, lucky decision actually.
And how did it feel to sell the company that you had started and poured all that work into?
It was a relief. Also, I that's when I noticed that I didn't fall in love with my companies, so it was easy for me to let them go. That was the first case, but I've done it some other times during my life, and I have no problem letting go of companies. So it was relief.
And so you're a burned out recent college grad with a business sale under your belt. What did you do next?
Um, what I think was natural. I saved some money, like half of it, The other half I decided invested. I invested in real estate, and the other half I said, okay, I'm gonna live off this money for a year doing nothing, and I did that. It became 2 years because I used that money to make small investments, small loans, and it multiplied. So I ended up having a 2 year sabbatical. I started traveling the world, but then I remembered that I hadn't had a social life when I was younger in my own city. So I came back to Mexico City. I moved into a very hip neighborhood, and I would just wake up super late, drink every day, and did everything I didn't do when I was younger. And it was, on one side, a really good decision because I had fun, but I would never take such a long sabbatical again. It took me so long to get out of it.
And what made you decide to come back into the startup world instead of after the sabbatical going into, say, a normal job and using your degree?
Well, first I ran out of money. I ran out of the money that I put apart to do this. So I needed to make money fast, and the only way I knew how to make money was setting up a business. And also because of selling a business so young and my first one, I fall into this delusion of thinking I was like the best entrepreneur in the world and that I could do anything. So it was kind of my ego took me into the next step of setting another business.
And how did you pick the idea to start on?
It picked me. I actually had a notebook where I would write business ideas, and they were all crap. But when I ran out of money, I said, okay, I need to plug into the whatever ecosystem there is. And there was one, the first co-working in Mexico City started. A friend started it, so I said, okay, I'm gonna rent an office from you, and I'm just gonna sit there and do nothing, like browse the web. And I did, and Twitter was becoming really relevant in Mexico around that time. And since I had nothing to do but tweet, I kind of got the hang of the tool and hang of the industry and whatnot. And the guys that were sitting across from me, they were a marketing agency that had no digital arm, and they had this brand. They had Jägermeister, that they wanted to start doing some stuff in social media. And they were like, hey, you know about this? And I was like, yeah. And they said, why don't you do it? And I told them, yeah, but don't hire me. Let me set up a company and I'll do a digital agency and then hire the company. And that's what they did. And I funded a digital social media agency because it just fell in my lap.
And at what year would that have been? 2009 ish,
I think,
somewhere in there.
yeah, it was 2009. Yeah.
And what was the ecosystem like in Mexico back in 2009? You said it's the first co-working space and sort of hanging
Yeah.
out there. So I'm sure you got to see what was going on. What was it like?
There were since 2006. There were a few people, older people, doing stuff. Maybe Endeavor already existed. Maybe a fund in Monterrey, which is a northern city in Mexico. But in Mexico City, there was nothing at all. And maybe some people started doing um, like lifestyle businesses. Like I remember a girl, she was selling jewelry. Then this other guy, he started a juice company. So there were maybe, I don't know, 10 companies starting, 10 startups. So it was almost deserted. There was nothing.
And so how did the social media agency go?
Well, it's still alive. It gives me, it's my cash cow. It really it's had its ups and downs, but it's done really well. It's maintained. It's been a small business, a lifestyle business, a boutique agency, and it has transformed over the years. Now I have business partners, and they operate it, and I don't operate it anymore. But it's been doing really well. Actually, I hope it gets probably acquired in the next couple of years because now it's an old business for the current standards.
Did you consciously think that when you were starting the business or a little bit down the road, hey, I need a cash cow business that's going to pay
No,
my monthly fee
no,
so I can do stuff more risky, or no?
not at all. I don't think I did it consciously. Maybe it was in the back of my mind. I had I remember back then I was very young, and I just read, um, Rich Dad Poor Dad, something like that. That you get in touch with the passive income thing, and you think that's what you need to do. So maybe it was kind of in the back of my mind trying to start to build something that would give me passive income in the future, but it was just intuition and 90% luck.
And then what brought you to start or to co-found Aventones?
What brought me was that since I had a big ego and I thought I was the shit, I started writing on a blog, and it was probably one of the first entrepreneurship blogs in Mexico. So people started following whatever I said, which my only experience was, I don't know, a degree and setting up a couple of companies and selling one, and it was just pure luck. So I started writing, so it gave me kind of authority over the ecosystem, and I got these guys that they were my brother's friends, and they came to me and they said, "Hey, could you listen to our idea?" And I would get a lot of those every week. I listened to it and I was like, "Oh, this is really cool. You should do it." And I gave them my advice, and I told them, "Hey, and if it's so good that if you don't do it in a week, I'm going to steal your idea." And of course, I wasn't going to steal it, but I said it kind of because I was desperate and I was kind of um, angry that entrepreneurs would not follow on and would not take the necessary steps to actually build a company. So I thought that might incentivize them, and it did. And they invited me as a co-founder. Then I helped them find a technical co-founder, and we built the company. So again, it fell in my lap.
And what did Aventones do?
It was a ride sharing company. It started as a B2B business. We would sell a license for the software that would allow companies with a lot of employees to have like this internal social network that would match people that were willing to give a ride with people that needed a ride. And in a city like Mexico City, that's so crowded with cars and traffic is just crazy, it made a lot of sense. So we kind of hop on also on the green movement and CO2 emissions. So it was one of the first Silicon Valley kind of startups. So it was pretty sexy at the time, and and it worked. It got acquired a few years later by BlaBlaCar, which is a French European unicorn.
So going back to the beginning of it and deciding to work with guys that pitched you the idea, that's a fairly risky proposition for somebody who is jumping into a team. And something that we see a lot is founder dynamics. So how did you become comfortable enough to decide to work with them? And what advice would you give to other founders who are either looking for a co-founder or are thinking of joining a company that's just getting off the ground?
Okay, I decided to work with them because they were I knew them personally. One of them is my brother's best friend, and the other one is my brother's ex girlfriend. So they were pretty close. So it was like partnering with my almost brothers, or cousins. And my first startup, I started with my cousin, and it was a really good experience. He's an amazing, decent guy. So until then, I had not tasted the bitter waters of founder problems. So I was kind of naive. But if looking back, um, for example, we were so inexperienced that we didn't even set up a vesting agreement, which backfired later. And but if I would have to give an advice, I would try to pilot or to test the waters first, see how you work together before doing any actual long-term agreements. It's kind of difficult to do that because when you're starting, I mean, you're in a hurry to make things grow. But I would invest some time on testing the relationship before going into it, because I don't know. I guess you've seen it as well, but the chance of things going bad between founders are pretty high.
Definitely. Definitely. And it's generally, from what I've seen, the number one issue for for startups. It's not even necessarily building a bad product or not getting product market fit. Those do happen, but if you have a strong founder team, you can keep pivoting and find something new. But if you have founders that are at each other's throats, it's not going to work.
I agree.
So, what was the inflection point in Aventones when you knew that it was going to be something that was going to start to work?
Um, I think when we went and met the first clients, I remember that was kind of my job to get the first corporate clients because I had some connections. Um, and we met the first, and we went. I remember to Citi, to the bank. Um, then we went with Costco, and we closed Costco in like 2 meetings. So that was amazing. So that's when I saw, hey, this might work. So it was very easy to sell. We I don't know, we landed into something people actually wanted without making any um, market research.
And did you raise money to push the growth of the company?
At first, no. The first year we just bootstrapped it. We all worked for free, and eventually we did raise money. And it was, I think, it was probably, I don't know if the first or one of the first investments from what today is All VP.
And what was the ecosystem like for raising money back in that would have been 2013-ish, 2012?
No. It was actually we started Aventones in
Okay.
2010, um, and then we raised probably 2012, 2013. That's when we raised, but we started earlier.
And so the funding ecosystem back in 2012, 2013, what did that look like compared to what it looks like today?
I remember from it was probably bigger than what I could see, but I remember it being only a fund in the north of Mexico that was they had really bad reputation for making founders wait a long time to get funds and eventually tell them uh, no after a huge due diligence. There was also, I think, 500 startups that was called Mexican VC back then. Maybe was starting, and these guys, all VP, that they were called. I can't remember some of the name. So maybe there were 3, 4 venture capital funds, and but I knew nothing. We didn't know nothing about raising money, cap tables, vesting, equity fundraising, or convertible note. That was not even in our radar.
And another thing that back then probably you were one of the few that was raising money. When you got acquired, we still hadn't seen the uptick in acquisition that we did in 2018. So can you walk me through what the thought process was, and then also the actual process of getting an acquisition done back in 2015
2015?
Mexico?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I left Aventones not as a co-founder. I kept some equity. We had to do a reverse vesting, um, maybe on 2014. Um, so the guys who did all the work for selling the company was were my co-founder, especially Alberto Padilla. So he met one of the BlaBlaCar's founders in some event back in the day. I don't know, in Europe or something. And so Aventones was on BlaBlaCar's radar. And when they wanted to expand, it was basically the only company that they have heard of. They came down to Mexico. They contacted us, and since they were French and the guys from LVP speak perfect French, because they went to a French school here in Mexico. It was kind of a lucky fit. The negotiations went pretty fast, and they closed it. They actually, the way I found out was someday they called me and they say, "Hey, we're gonna need you to sign some paperwork because we're getting acquired." So I had nothing to do with it.
That's a good surprise.
Yeah, yeah,
So when
great
when you
surprise.
were when you were running the business, did you work on any other startups as investor or as did you have any other side projects?
Yes, I did. When I like the social media digital agency was on its way, and it was already becoming a cash cow. It start giving me money to do whatever I wanted on the side. So and I still had I started having passive income from my real estate investments that I had done before. So I was in a pretty comfortable and privileged position, and I started investing. I invested in I remember a platform, a soccer stats platform, um, and it was, I mean, it died in I think 8 months. I lost all my money. I invested a very small ticket, but I learned that was like my first failure, and I started learning how to invest by that. Also, I remember I uh, I invested in some side projects that my previous co-founder from the ecotourism company was starting to do. Again, in the children entertainment industry, they failed big time. So I had another failure, and I guess maybe a couple other that I don't have in the radar now. But yeah, I did maybe 4 investments, small tickets, and I lost all my money, all of the money that I invested in those.
So the decision to angel invest is probably someone listening in Silicon Valley or New York is saying, "Oh yeah, it's totally normal, makes total sense." But for Latin America, there aren't that many angel investors, especially back then. What made you decide to do it, and what were some of the lessons you learned from those first failures of investments?
I think there were two. One that was starting to be born in my mind, which was to give back. Um, Now it's way more present, but back then I said, hey, if I did well, I hadn't put my finger on it, but I think I started to recognize my privilege and the luck that I had. So I wanted to give back. So that was one thing, and which also gave me a lot of satisfaction to see other entrepreneurs succeed. I still get a lot of satisfaction when I see when I help someone and they succeed. It's kind of the romantic side. And the other one was, hey, I invested in some real estate, and now it's giving me money back without working on it. So maybe I should diversify and start investing in other stuff that I know, an industry that I know, which was or that was starting to know, which was the tech industry. So I invested looking for future rewards.
And so, what was the step from going from an angel investor to starting a company builder?
Okay, so I think the step was I remember talking with one of my who is now one of my best friends, Jorge Soto. He has an amazing startup called Miraculous now, and it's a biotech company. And he was probably one of the most successful entrepreneurs back then. He actually, with his business partner, was involved in developing the first Uber app, but that's another story. Anyways, he was an amazing guy, and I pitched him a startup that I wanted to start. Basically, that startup was, I don't know, for you who have watched the first episode of I think it's the fourth season of Black Mirror. It's the one that they have this rating app where you can rate, say, if someone is amazing or not, and then just hell breaks loose. Well, basically, that was the company that I wanted to fund, that I wanted to start, which was a rating company for people, where you could only rate people positively, because if you rate them negatively, things will go bad. So, anyways, I pitched it to this guy. He liked it, and when we were trying to build it, we remember seeing all the options that we had now, which were some incubators, accelerators, funds, and we started to see all these vices and things that we didn't like. So we said, hey, you know, I think we're pretty good at building companies. Why don't we do a company that builds companies, and then we find passionate people that want to partner with us and take them to the next level. So basically, we left that rating system app or startup, and we started a company builder because we were unhappy with the way things were. Then we by googling and by talking with people, we knew that it was called a company builder, but we didn't see it as people see now, that they specifically see the opportunity of building a company builder because some have been successful and do it. We just did it like it was kind of natural for us.
And what were some of the first companies that you started to build at the company builder?
Well, we built one that I liked. I still like a lot, but it failed, which is kind of a Netflix for books and magazines, especially for magazines. And it eventually failed, but I think I still love the idea. And in Mexico, it would be such a hit. So if anyone's thinking of doing it in Mexico, they should. That was one of the firsts. And also, we did an e-commerce platform. I don't know if you remember Fab.com,
Mhm.
something just like it, and it failed just like Fab did.
And what did you learn from running a company builder?
I learned that I think that's when I got finally a big hit on my ego, and I learned that I was not the shit. And because I learned how difficult it was to actually build a company, that it was not just having a great idea and build it, and that it required a lot of work. And especially, I think what I learned from the company build it is that if you build something, they will not come. I mean, you have to build something and then make it grow and put a lot of effort, money, and brains into it to make it a success. So I think what I learned is this thing is difficult. It's not easy building companies.
And what happened? How long did you run the company builder for? And then what happened next?
I ran the company builder for, it was probably, let's see, uh, maybe it was 3 years. Um, I would need to check exactly the timeline. But what happened is we were not growing enough and we needed money. So another business partner we found through an Endeavor, we met another guy, really smart guy, and he became our business partner. And we decided to build a venture capital fund because we needed fuel for the company builder. So we decided to build a fund, and we would invest in outside companies, but also in the company builder companies. And that made a lot of sense for the fund because we would get um, cheaper equity in the companies that we were building ourselves. And the fund would end up with, I don't know, over 60% equity in the companies that we built. And so it took up from there. And after a short period of time, we got acquired by a Austrian German fund that wanted to expand, and they were looking for a Latin American fund. And we had made a merger with a Latin American fund called Nazca. So we're one of the only funds that had Mexico and Latin America. So we got acquired.
And what was that process like?
Um, I learned a lot. I think that's when stakes got really high and there was really substantial amounts of money on uh, on the table. So I learned a lot of how you really evaluate a business, how you negotiate it, what can go wrong, how you can get screwed, where are the opportunities. And I think in my career as an entrepreneur, as an investor, that's when I grew up.
And what would you say would be the top couple of lessons that you learned?
Okay, I learned one: never ever send someone else to negotiate on your behalf. It doesn't matter if it's on the other side of the world. Go. You have to be there. You have to be on the negotiating table, especially of course, if you have if you're a major equity holder in whatever you're negotiating. If you're a small shareholder, maybe that's not even your place. But if a lot of is on the table, you better be on the table. That's one. And the other one is um, I think I learned that it doesn't matter how good you think you are. Always go through the basics. You cannot cut corners. You have to um, validate an idea, pivot the idea, bootstrap it at the beginning. So there's no cutting corners.
I think going to negotiate on your own behalf is super important. We had a couple of different situations with companies that we were involved in where they were either pressured to not go and negotiate on their own behalf, or were convinced that it was not the right thing, and it's never worked out. We've never had a situation where it's worked out. So I think that that's a really good lesson.
Yeah, it's obvious, don't you think? But I don't know. When I was there, I didn't see it. I didn't see it at all.
Yeah, we had a similar one too, where we felt like, okay, these guys are really pushing hard to negotiate on our behalf. We'll let them do it, and it just, yeah, it blew up. Didn't work at all.
Yeah, of course.
So after leaving the fund, what did you decide to do? How did you decide to go back into being sort of, you're straddling both sides of the table, doing angel investing and doing companies?
Well, first, I decided that I didn't want to go back, at least for a long time, into venture capital. I I think that one of the things that I learned was uh, I'm on the side. If there are two sides, I don't know if there are, but if there are two sides and the entrepreneurs and the founders are on one side and the VCs are on the other one, I'm on the entrepreneur side. I'm in love with passionate people who want to build a business and roll their sleeves and just work hard. And I didn't like the cutthroat um, part of the VC. I'm too much of a romantic, and I don't think I have the nerve. So that's one thing. And the other one is I decided it was maybe a time for a break, but I learned from my previous experience. So what I did was I didn't go into a sabbatical, a purely sabbatical. So what I did was like a productive sabbatical where I would do passion projects. I would play with ideas that not necessarily would make me money, but that I wanted to see implemented in the world. And basically, that's what I've been doing for the past three years, maybe almost going on 4 years. And it's been a fun ride. I've learned a lot, and what I try to do, and this time consciously, was um, starting to draw some dots on my path that will eventually, looking back, will connect. So those dots were my passion projects. And at the same time, I decided that I couldn't complain about VC and about investors uh, if I wasn't doing something to walk the talk. So I didn't. I decided to start a not a fund, actually the anti-fund, through angel investing. So I started getting together people with great reputation in the ecosystem, basically entrepreneurs or successful entrepreneurs that wanted to give back and start investing. And we started a group, actually it's a startup that invests in other startups called Zero BS. And we started, two of us, then it was three, and it ended up being nine, and now we're going to expand more. But in that group of investors, it's full of people with amazing reputations, with amazing stories, and with really a passion for helping entrepreneurs. And that's where I'm focusing a lot of my attention nowadays.
And how would you say it's different from, say, in an early stage VC?
So um, one thing is we're not structured as a fund legally. We are SAPI, which is like a C corp. Um, we have no managing partners. There's no carry. There's no management fee, of course. There are no LPs. So it's more like a company where we are business partners who put in money, and the business model is putting money into other companies and helping them, and then hoping for in a few years to have a return. So the line is pretty fuzzy. I mean, a lot of it also says we're a fund, but we try to not to behave differently. Another thing is that we, in the core of our values, is respect for the founders, for the entrepreneurs. So we, for example, take 7 days to make a decision once we've seen or heard a pitch, because we're very aware that due diligence and that the time between you see a pitch and you decide to invest or not invest can kill a company. So that's one of the things that we do. We're very respectful of the entrepreneurs. And until now, after maybe a year and a half since we started investing, we have a very good reputation and founders really like us. Of course, we've made mistakes and we try to fix them along the way, but that's basically it.
Yeah, it's a really cool addition to the ecosystem. I'm hoping more founders start to do angel investing or coming up with interesting structures like this to get capital into the hands of early stage entrepreneurs, because there's still a pretty big lack of capital for very early stage companies in the region.
Yeah,
And hopefully it pushes the current actors to um, go faster and have more entrepreneur friendly deals and things that are more standard in the US.
yeah, and one thing that I think I should note that we just started doing this is that the actual legal name of this company is Finding Outliers. So what we wanted is exactly that, and we were kind of achieving it, but we needed a process. So we just changed our process, and what we do is we invest only in companies that we have like unanimity on the votes or one against all. So if there is a company that we see and has, I don't know, maybe 7 votes for and 2 against, we don't invest. If it has 9 for, we invest. Or if it has 1 for and 8 against, we invest.
That's interesting. And how did you come up with those rules?
We wanted because we wanted to really, really find the best companies. So we said, okay, so if it's unanimous, then it's a no-brainer, right? So we invest. But if we make it the one against all, what happens is it puts you in a setup, in a mindset as an investor of saying, okay, if I'm the one saying yes and the rest are saying no, I better be sure. I mean, and if we do invest, then I'm gonna be helping these guys like no one has helped them before, because I put my word and everything behind them. So I need for them to succeed. So since we've been doing that, our mindset changed so much, and there's some deals that we have let go or passed that maybe a year ago we would have invested in, and there's not yet, but I'm sure there's going to be 1 or 2 deals in the near future that there's one against all, and let's see how it plays out. We're still experimenting.
That's really cool. I'm glad to hear that there's experimentation going on in the VC model. It's definitely something, an early investment model. It's something that needs to happen. So I wanted to ask you some of the standard questions that I ask people on the podcast. So the first one is, do you have any books, blogs, podcasts, documentaries that you like to recommend to people, whether entrepreneurs or not?
Yeah, sure. Okay, books. I think, well, there's a lot of books on the matter. I remember liking a lot originals. I think it came out maybe 2 years ago. Because I think it's really cool how they say they demystify all that sexy thing about the founders, that you need to be 25 years old and burn all the ships and focus on one thing. And I think that's a lot of bullshit. And this book makes a point on it. So if I would recommend one, I think it would be that one, Originals. It kind of uh, takes a lot of the bullshit out of the equation. Then podcasts. I'm not really into business podcasts, because I think that they put you into a mindset where you start losing original thoughts. You start doing things as everyone else. So I think what I recommend actually about reading and about podcasting and about blogs is um, read fiction, read novels. Um, don't read so many business books. because then you're thinking like everyone's thinking. So I'm a lot into trying to think differently and adding value. And I think you only achieve that by doing a zoom out. And so I would recommend leave your laptop in your office. Don't take it home, and don't read so many business books. Read novels, classic novels, whatever you want.
Do you have any favorite novels?
Yeah, um, I like a lot East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I also like another one that's called Ocean Sea. It's from an Italian um, author. It's called Alessandro Barico. Um, and I recently read a really good one, which surprised me, which is called Open by Andre Agassi, the tennis player. I think it's really well written. And I also like a lot the novels written by Herman Hesse. I think his kind of writing is beautiful. And I don't know. Maybe I would have to think about some others, but those are the first that come into my mind.
That's interesting. You're not the first person who's recommended reading fiction, especially science fiction. A lot of people have recommended, saying that it's a good way to open up the mind. I think you're right. What advice would you give to founders who are in Latin America who are looking to raise money, both at an early stage and then maybe later on in the process?
Okay, in Latin America is very different. Here you have to have traction or an amazing proven team. So probably you're in the first category. Um, so what I recommend is bootstrap. Um, Try go out there and start testing your model, get some traction, and then raise money. If you raise money just with a PowerPoint, it's gonna be tough, and you might get frustrated. So I would do the testing first, and then try to raise money. And also here, unfortunately, your network plays a huge part. So go out there and network, um, become friends with influential people, guys, privileged guys that have a lot of money. Those guys have the connections, and here in Mexico and Latin America, it plays a part, even if we don't want to accept it.
Do you think that that's starting to change, or still very, very a big piece of the ecosystem?
It is changing. It is changing. But in Mexico, if you are a founder that comes from Europe or the US and you have a master's degree and you worked at Linio or some big company, you're gonna raise money. But if you are a founder that has maybe a college degree and you went to public school and you have a good idea, but your founding team also are from your same background, that's going to be really hard. It's changing. There's a few outliers now, and the trend is positive, but still really hard if you're not privileged, the equivalent of being a privileged white kid in the US.
What do you think that funds, entrepreneurs, investors, people in the ecosystem can do to help change that, to give more opportunity to people in the ecosystem?
I think I think what they could do is start bringing on board in the funds, in the managing team, people from those backgrounds. Because if you're trying to change it from your privileged position, then it looks a lot like philanthropy, and we know that there's something wrong there, right? Because the interests are kind of weird. So you need to change the system a little bit, and you change the system by bringing people that do not or were not beneficiaries of that system. So I think that's what I would do: hire people, bring people in that came from the backgrounds that had a rough time with non-privileged kids.
I think it's interesting that, at least from the startups that I've seen up close, that that's starting to happen, especially on the developer side and the engineering side of the
Yes,
equation, because that's a place where just talent plays. If you're good, you're going to get hired. And so I'm hoping that as people find more success in working in startup companies, they're empowered to either start their own businesses or maybe even get into angel investing and start to change the dynamic. So I
you're
think you're
totally
spot
right.
on with how it will work.
Yeah, that's so weird. In Mexico, at least, I haven't met yet one single. No, yes, maybe one, but only one developer, a tech founder that came from a private, privileged university. Most come from a very different background.
Yeah, we've seen that the from looking at our portfolio, it's not the super high end quote unquote elite that do really well. It's that one level down
Yeah,
where you had a decent enough childhood where you got a good education and but you still have that desire to build something, and you also don't have the biggest safety net that if it doesn't go perfectly, you're going to quit.
yeah, exactly. I totally agree.
So going back to a question about you, if you could go back to when you had just sold your first company and you were just embarking on the time off, knowing what you know today, what would you do differently, if anything?
Um, I think I would. I would have invested in some education abroad, probably in the US, in both the technical side, like I would learn how to build software, and also I would invest it in a course, a crash course, maybe not an MBA, but I would have strengthened my finance and legal knowledge and abilities because I had to learn that the hard way.
And then the last question I have for you is if you could go back to when just before you had this string of say 4 or 5 investments and small startups that didn't work out, knowing what you know today, what advice would you give yourself just before you started investing in those companies?
I would give the typical advice. Take the team. Take a look at the team. It's worth a lot. Make sure that it's a balanced team. If it's not balanced, then don't go there. And don't invest in companies that are not willing to roll their sleeves and bootstrap at the beginning and test the market. I think those are the two things that I would tell myself.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to see what Zero BS does and also what you continue to do in the Mexican ecosystem. So thank you. Really, I really appreciate you taking the time to do it. This has been really fun. I think it's going to be really valuable for people. So thanks again.
Thank you, Nathan, for the opportunity to talk, and I hope people can listen to my story and draw their own conclusions and do way better than what I've done.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Be sure to check out the show notes on nathanlustig.com for links to everything we talked about during the podcast. Remember, if you like this podcast, please share it with a friend or give us a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It's the best way to share knowledge about the LATAM ecosystem, and it really helps us out. Thanks to Angel and Sophia for helping produce the podcast, and thanks again to all of you for listening. Have a great rest of your day.